It's really like any other piece of property in the state, because we have some areas that we are managing purely for habitat, where we're trying to provide basically the conditions that would have been here pre-Columbus arrival, pre-European arrival. And we have other places where we're trying to manage the land very much like you'd see for industrial timber production, where we're trying to grow trees as fast as possible. And so every day is different. Every piece of ground out here is a little bit different, but it gives us the opportunity, some neat long-term studies, allow students to get out and do things, those sorts of things.
Yeah, great. So you're a forester. You're in forestry. Can you tell us a little bit about what the occupation entails and maybe some misconceptions about the career?
Sure. No, what that means. Yeah. So foresters are basically land managers. And really that comes down to what do you want out of the property? And so, we manage for habitat like we talked about. We manage for timber production and economic values. We manage for recreational and aesthetic uses. And so foresters are really designed to sort of do that balancing act. Okay, what do you want? Here are the tools that would get you there. Here are the opportunities that you might have. And so you can sort of decide what makes the most sense given the conditions, the landowner, the objectives, the vegetation, the current condition, all those sorts of things. Forestry is really a neat profession. I really enjoy it. I get to teach in it. I get to work with students who are interested in it. A lot of professional opportunities for them. And it's really sort of one of the oldest land management kind of professions. And so it's got a lot of neat history to it and those sorts of things. Yeah.
So you mentioned kind of different kinds of properties to manage, private or public lands. What are some challenges that each one faces?
Sure. No, absolutely. So, often there's a misconception. You start talking about land management and people think, okay, well, I get to go out in the woods and I don't have to talk to anybody anymore, which, Exhibit A would be that's not the case. So really, most of land management deals with managing fire, managing vegetation, planting trees, harvesting, those sorts of things. But a lot of it is people. And so if you're working for the federal government as managing a national forest, a lot of it is trying to balance recreational use with the needs for habitat or an endangered species or those sorts of things. Or if you're working in private lands, it's trying to provide those resources that, we all need paper, we all need timber for, houses and things like this. And so trying to balance the environmental with the economic, with the public perceptions and those sorts of things. And so foresters really try to sort of sit at that pivot point between all three of those demands and figure out, how do you maximize the value for the landowner, for the objectives of the landowner, and realizing that in some cases with landowners, if it's public land, national park, national forest, county park, those sorts of things, we're all the landowners. So it's what the public want out of this property, figuring out what that is and trying to make it that way.
Great. So you've mentioned land management. That's ultimately what it comes down to. So what are some different ways that you manage land and what kind of tools do you use that we would see here at the Austin Cary Forest?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So fire is a big one. And later on we're going to hear from Gage, who's in the next session, is going to go into a little more detail on that. But we used fire on different regimes, different seasonalities, where we're doing different uses of fire to manage vegetation. Florida is really different from a lot of the rest of the U.S. because we have a lot of moisture. We're a wet state. We're also warm most of the year, and so vegetation actually grows really quickly. And if we don't set it on fire ourselves under intentional purposes, when we have the equipment there to maintain it, the winds are blowing in the right direction, those sorts of things, Mother Nature will set it on fire herself. And when she does that, it may, smoke in a road, cause an accident, burn up someone's house, those sorts of things. And so we use fire extensively to sort of manage habitat. Most of the plants and animals here are adapted with fire in mind. And so, fire is a critical part of that ecosystem. We also do mowing. We also do logging. We also do a lot of mechanical activities like that. We plant trees. We plant trees for production. We plant trees to improve habitat, those sorts of things. We also use chemicals. We use herbicide to control invasive species, invasive plants and things like this. And so we're sort of trying to, all of these tools are tools that have a whole variety of different things you can do with them. We're sort of trying to select the right timing, the right dosing or extent or intensity, the right seasonality to meet the objectives. Again, what does the land need to be used for?
Yeah. Great. And I know, so we're going to have questions at the end of this. And as you're watching, if you have any questions, please submit them now. So at the end, we can answer them in our question segment. But I know a lot of people probably have questions about the California wildfires that are going on. So what are the odds of something like that occurring here, specifically in the southeastern United States?
Well, so the first thing is that the ecosystems in Florida are dramatically different than what we have here. Most of the Florida ecosystems are designed with fire as a maintenance kind of thing. So you hear fire as sort of a maintenance fire or a stand replacement, a forest replacement fire. There are places in Florida that have those kind of stand replacement fires, but for the most part in Florida, we're a maintenance kind of fire. So the fires tend to be, if the land has been managed well, they tend to be in the understory. They're not destroying the forest. California is very different. A lot of the habitat that they're in is very different, and so it has stand replacement where they have big catastrophic fires. They're still ecologically appropriate, but obviously not when people are living right up next door and those sorts of things. But Florida has had really bad fire seasons. 98 was probably the best example. In 1998, we had extensive fires that burned a significant amount of the state. That was mostly due to drought and things like this. Florida really leads the nation, or is a leader in the nation, on the use of prescribed fire. And if we burn it, then that means the vegetation is low enough that Mother Nature can, doesn't mean it doesn't start a fire accidentally through a cigarette butt or a lightning strike or those sorts of things. But the fire is much more controllable. And so you can really start to look at prescribed fires as a way to minimize the damage from a wildfire.
Yeah. So one last question about the Austin Cary Forest in general. How have you seen it change over the years since its inception?
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's a good question. So one of the things that we always focus on is that forests are dynamic. They are always changing. And just because we're sort of trying to hold them in a state doesn't mean that we always do that kind of thing. So there are areas that we have cut, logged areas, replanted them, get to see the trees grow back up. There are areas where we've gotten in and done fires where we weren't able to do fires historically. This has allowed for the vegetation to change dramatically. So there's been a lot of opportunities to sort of see the forest evolve, and it will continue to evolve with or without us.
Great, great. So I think we're just about wrapping up now, and we're going to probably transition to questions that we've gotten online, if you're ready.
Fantastic.
Good.
All right. Hey, Scott. I'm
Howdy.
Becky. We are still waiting for a few more questions to come in, but we do have one to start us off with. What kind of trees are your favorite?
Oh, wow. That's an excellent question. So I'm a little bit weird. I really like sandpine. This is actually a sandpine tree right behind here. It's a neat species in terms of it's a southeastern pine, but it has a very different behavior than most of the other pines. We talked about fires being stand replacement, or where they're catastrophic versus sort of burning through the understory. Sandpine actually is not very fire tolerant. And so it tends to be a short-lived species, and when you do have a fire, it tends to be a catastrophic fire that completely eliminates all the vegetation, and then it's adapted to produce seeds and come back thick and do well after that. So it's a neat species. It's very different. Yeah.
Okay, so that kind of leads me to another question that I had. Typically, when you think of fire, you think fire kills things, right? And so in some ways, that's good out here, right?
Yeah.
But how does it keep from killing the stuff you don't want it to kill?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And a lot of that is the land managers, the prescribed burners, managing the fire appropriately so that we kill what we want and don't kill the things we're trying to save. And so that could be things like burning on specific days when you have enough soil moisture or you have wind out of the right direction. Could be the way you light the fire. And so, you may be lighting fires that run through a forest very quickly, where there's a lot of heat, but it's a short heat. It moves through very fast. Or you may be lighting a fire that's going to go slowly through the forest. That's not as much heat, but it's a longer duration, and so that will actually kill other things. A lot of times in stands like this that are behind us, we're trying to promote the grass, we're trying to promote the longleaf pine, we're trying to discourage the hardwoods. And so we may be trying to burn hot enough to kill the hardwoods, but not so hot to kill the pine trees. And so there's a lot of nuance to sort of managing fire to try to get the most benefits out of it.
Okay, so we have another question here from Littlewood School. They want to know, what type of tree do you have most common in the forest?
Oh, that's a good question. So probably longleaf is the most common tree on the Austin Cary. It was actually probably the most common tree throughout the southeast at one point. But longleaf is not a great timber species. It doesn't grow very fast in comparison to some other species of pine, and so it wasn't planted as extensively. It also really is adapted well to fire, but there was a time period where we weren't doing as much burning as we probably should have, and so the benefits of having longleaf weren't significant at that point. There's been a tremendous resurge in sort of doing more longleaf work since then, and so there's a lot of longleaf, and we're actually lucky on the forest. We have some old longleaf stands that have been maintained with fire, and it's a whole other neat ecosystem to see. Yeah.
Okay, so you were just mentioning about how you sometimes wanted things to burn hot enough to kill one thing, but not hot enough to kill another. So how hot do the fires get?
Yeah, so the short answer always is it depends. It depends on how dry it is. It depends on how hot the day is, those sorts of things. In general, prescribed burn will get above 1,200 degrees Fahrenheit. We're talking very hot. Water obviously boils at 212 degrees, and even a fire that's that low in intensity has the potential for killing vegetation. But when a fire gets moving a little hotter, you can get up over 1,000, well over 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Yeah.
Okay, so, I think about our audience here, and we have lots of students that may live on property or have forests on their land. So what would happen if a student said to you, well, I've got land. If it's a good thing to burn it, then can I just burn it myself?
No, don't do that. So managing prescribed fires is a whole sort of sub-profession of forestry, of land management, and it takes a lot of training and it takes a lot of expertise to do it well. And I will say I've been burning for probably 12 years at this point, and every fire that I do, I'm learning something else. And so it takes a lot of understanding of weather patterns. It takes a lot of experience with different ignition techniques, with just the vegetation and what the objectives are that you're trying to get out of it. So in Florida, a landowner can burn their property, but they have to accept the fact that if it damages something else, that's all their responsibility. If it gets out, if it goes where it shouldn't, if it smokes in a road, all those sorts of things. And so, it's best left to professionals with a lot of experience and a lot of training.
Okay, so we do have one more question, but it's time to wrap it up. So we will come back at the end and try to answer a few more questions. But for now, thank you very much for offering your expertise for this segment. We are going to take just a quick transition, and we're going to move over to Gage, who's going to talk to us about fire ecology.